Imagine you're camping in the heart of Yellowstone. It's the middle of the night, and you leave your tent for a quick walk to the facilities. Out of nowhere, in the beam of your flashlight, there's a creature. It's massive, towering over you, with a thick mane and shoulders like a linebacker. Its eyes are fierce, and its face, it's something out of a nightmare, with a snout and teeth that don't belong to any bear you've heard of. This isn't any animal you've seen on a nature show. This is what Tim came face to face with, right in the middle of Yellowstone. Stick around as we jump into his harrowing encounter. Back in the 80s, I went camping at Yellowstone National Park. I've been to Yellowstone so many times, it's like a safe spot for me. The peace of the pines, the sounds of animals, the snap of a campfire. It's all a nice change from the noisy city. When I was in my 20s, I basically lived in parks. I'd just throw a bag over my shoulder, pack some snacks, and leave my office cubicle to enjoy the outdoors. But I gotta say, that summer night in Yellowstone was something else. It was in July, and the forest was eerily quiet. Out of nowhere, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. Not sure if it was those 3 beers I drank, or the not-so-hot chili I made that disturbed my sleep. But whatever it was, I was awake. After searching for my flashlight, I slowly walked out of my tiny tent, pointing my light toward the lower part of the forest. The light wasn't that bright, but it was better than nothing on the pitch-black night. It was chillier than I thought it'd be, and the wind was pretty harsh against my skin. I wrapped my jacket around me tighter as I moved a bit into the woods, making sure I didn't get lost. I mean, I go camping a lot. I'm usually pretty chill around animals, but something was off that night. I don't know why the trees looked scarier, or why the usual night sounds were quieter. There was also this weird, stale smell in the air. It kind of smelled like a wet dog, but worse. I pointed my flashlight and saw a big, bent-over shape deeper in the trees. Honestly, it was hard to make out what it was. I saw something big and shadowy that spooked me a bit, so I clung to my flashlight tighter. Thinking about some wild animal attacks I'd heard of, I quickly finished what I was doing, watching the figure closely, but not sure if I was just being paranoid. Suddenly, I heard this low, throaty growl that bounced off the nearby trees. Something big was definitely moving through the bushes, but weirdly, I didn't hear the usual sound of rustling leaves or rocks moving. What really freaked me out was the loud, snarling sound that came next. I swear the noises gave me the shivers, making me feel colder than the actual night. It started to hit me then. I wasn't alone out there in the wild, and I really hoped whatever was out there wasn't as interested in me as I was in it. Then, I spotted something with my flashlight that really made my heart race. 2 yellow eyes. They were scary, bouncing my light back at me like 2 fireballs. I don't think my heart's ever beat that fast, especially in the quiet of the forest. I was stuck in place, mouth dry, and the crunching leaves under my boots were the loudest sound around. I could tell from the silhouette it was big. I've seen a lot of animals around here before, but this massive guy freaked me out a lot. I'm guessing it was about 7 or 8 feet tall. It was fully covered in this dark fur, which looked even darker because the lighting was so bad. You could easily mistake it for a bear, but then it stood up and it didn't seem like a bear at all. That's when I freaked out. It had dog-like legs, but was standing like a human. I gasped. It growled once more, a deep sound that made me feel like prey. I have no idea how long I just stood there, staring back into its eyes. I was sweating all over, and I could see that it was breathing heavily too. I just, sort of, instinctively reached for this small pocket knife I had on me. I stumbled backward, hardly managing to stay upright, and quickly hid behind some trees until I bumped into my tent. I jumped inside, kept my flashlight on, and just stayed there. The tent didn't provide much protection, but it was all I had. I was just there, gripping my small knife, waiting for sunup. It was quiet, only the usual night sounds. It's like it just left me alone for some reason. I have no idea why. When morning came, everything seemed back to normal. I didn't see any signs of a weird creature or anything like that in the woods. It looked pretty normal. You'd think I'd quit camping after that, but no, I didn't. I continued doing what I was doing, but never alone anymore. I couldn't figure out what I saw that night or why it didn't bother me. That's my story. I was in Algonquin Park a few years ago, in Ontario, doing a bit of field research. I'm an anthropology grad student. We were studying Indigenous folklore, a subject I've always found fascinating. The park covers nearly 8,000 square kilometers of dense pine forest, interlaced with clear blue lakes. It was mid-November and the air had started getting nippy. I want to tell you about one afternoon in particular. Fieldwork is usually a routine of discussions, note-taking, and transcription. This particular day, however, was different. I was excited because I had an interview lined up with one of the oldest members of the community, a woman who was said to know quite a bit about the old ways and stories, the kind many people have forgotten or put aside. These were oral histories, not widely recorded or circulated in mainstream sources. I was eager because this was a real opportunity to learn something unique and possibly undocumented. My mornings typically involved the standard, less thrilling aspects of fieldwork, documenting, photography, and correlating GPS data with my findings. That day was no different. After that, I headed to the town's oldest library as I found locals there who had interesting stories to tell, teachers, librarians, and the lot. That afternoon, I made my way to the interviewee's home. Through my visits, I had come to appreciate the rustic charm of these rural homesteads. Her quaint rustic cabin stood in beautiful contrast to the rugged wilderness of Algonquin. Our conversation naturally covered tales about spirit animals, totems, and sacred ceremonies. It was near dusk when she started sharing a tale about an ancient entity, a dark legend that instantly grabbed my attention. This elder, with her furrowed brows and tense eyes, talked about a creature that had apparently haunted these parts for centuries. The dimming light of dusk lent her compelling story an eerie atmosphere. She spoke in a hushed tone that suggested the gravity of the tale. I pressed for more details. Between her intermittent pauses and unsettling descriptions, a picture started forming in my mind of a menacing creature, seemingly part of the natural landscape, but far from anything natural. Its height, she hesitated, then raised her hand above her frail form, indicating something tall, really tall, much taller than any human. Its face, she said, was a skull, which reminded her of a deer's skull she once found in the woods, barren and frightening. As for its eyes, she muttered glowing. She paused, unwilling to discuss the creature further. She sighed and made a sign of the cross, indicating her reluctance to continue. My anthropological curiosity was intensely piqued. Her descriptions didn't match any of the creature profiles I knew from my study of indigenous myths and folklore. I played politely and wrapped up the conversation shortly after, but my mind was consumed with curiosity to learn more. So that's how the Wendigo entered my research. I didn't know what it was called then. What I didn't anticipate was how the story would soon take on a life of its own. After leaving the elder's house, I had to shake off a sense of unease that had settled in me. My car was parked outside, and the trailhead was nearby. I planned to hike after the interview, to clear my head and enjoy the pine-scented air. Instead of a peaceful walk, a sense of eeriness pervaded. I stepped outside and was immediately hit by a wave of freezing air. The temperature had dropped sharply, my breath turning to frost in front of me. I zipped up my jacket higher, looking around and realizing that it was darker than it should have been at that time. The vibrant greens and yellows of the forest seemed muted and gloomy now. I felt an unnerving silence had fallen. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, just an oppressive quiet. I started my hike, not wanting the chill or the quiet to derail my plans. I tried to ignore the chilling anomalies and unease, starting my playlist as I walked on. Still, that strange anticipation wouldn't leave me. A mile or so in, I paused the music, realizing something else was off. A horrible putrid smell. I took off my headphones and instantly cringed. It smelled of rotting meat. The stench was vile and rank, like something had been dead nearby for a while. A knot formed in my stomach, dread creeping in. I suddenly felt a longing for the familiar comfort of home. I turned to head back. Just before I started my retreat, I caught something from the corner of my eye. A tall, skeletal figure ahead, barely visible amongst the dense trees. It was probably another hiker or someone from the elders' folklore sharing group. I tried to reassure myself, but the strange antlers I saw were hard to explain away. Despite my fears, curiosity compelled me to investigate. I flicked on my flashlight and there it stood, straight from the elder's tale. It was extremely tall, every bit of 8 feet, a shadowy figure with a skeletal body, antlers reminiscent of a stag jutting from its icy skull-like head, and eyes that bore into me, glowing an eerie yellow. The sight sent a chill straight to my bones. Before I could even think, instinct kicked in, and I ran. I reached my car panting heavily, half expecting the creature to be right behind me. But it was gone, back into the wilderness from where it had emerged. As I drove away, I couldn't resist one last look at the forest behind me. Thankfully, nothing. The elder's tale wasn't just a story anymore. It felt like my reality. In the following days, I tried to rationalize the events, wondering if exhaustion and keen anticipation from the story could have conjured such a realistic hallucination. But the icy fear I felt at that moment was too real to discredit. The Wendigo, the elder's story, had stopped being a mere tale for cultural textbooks. It had evolved into a personal account, the most curious and terrifying find of my research. So, about 5 years ago, I had this pretty crazy experience one cold October afternoon at Fort Cumberland, which is this old ruin built in 1751 in New Brunswick, Canada. I've always been interested in historical stuff. It's cool to think about all the people who have been in the same place before you, you know? So, I was at Fort Cumberland looking forward to checking out every nook and cranny, kind of excited and a bit nervous at the same time. It felt like I'd literally gone back in time to the 18th century, walking around the remains, with lots of mossy stones and bricks. I felt like I was in a different world, totally caught up in the beauty of this old, rundown fort. The place was just full of history. For a moment, I thought I could almost hear the French and British soldiers who used to be based here. The wind passing through the old ruins felt like it was filled with stories from long ago. I walked around there for hours, not even realizing it was getting dark. The way the bare tree branches cast shadows on the fort walls, and the sound of the wind made it feel kind of spooky. I was walking through a place where the officers used to stay when I started to feel like someone was watching me. I've camped out in creepy forest before, but this time was different. It felt like whatever was out there knew me. I was scared in a way I couldn't really describe. I had this gut feeling telling me to bolt, but I was strangely intrigued and stuck around. Still, I was totally blindsided by what came next. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadowy figure. I decided to confront whatever it was. The fading light was messing with the shadows, making everything around me seem darker. I couldn't quite make out the shape in front of me. It was huge, even taller than a person, and it looked like it had giant wings. I started to back off, trying to find my way over the rough stones without being able to see properly. Suddenly it got really windy, and I couldn't see clearly at all because of it. In that moment, I remembered a rumor I once heard about a creature that seemed to match this one. Could it be true? Was I really standing in front of the infamous Mothman? Its eyes were shiny and sort of hypnotizing. When it looked at me, I got this cold feeling like nothing I've ever experienced before. I tried to move but was too scared to do so. I noticed it had giant wings, about the same size as its body, slowly moving in the fading light. The wings kind of looked smooth, similar to leather, and they seemed to soak up light instead of reflecting it. Even with the creepy old sight behind it, the view was still super weird. I've heard about the Mothman and read about different people seeing it, but seeing it up close like this, it's something else entirely. Its face looked like a dummy's, except for those big red eyes. Everything went scarily silent. The wind stopped blowing. The trees stopped moving. It just froze, staring right at me, like we were having a wordless chat. I started freaking out. Should I run for it, or try to slowly back away from this weird human-like thing? But before I could make up my mind, the thing just disappeared. It shot up and vanished into the night sky so quickly. I just stood there, freaked out, holding the flashlight, feeling a cold shiver. Once it was gone, I finally started breathing normal again. It took a bit for me to really understand what had just happened. I didn't waste any more time. I just quickly turned around and ran for the exit. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the empty building. The moment I got into my truck, it dawned on me. I had really seen it, the famous Mothman. I met something that most people think is just a myth or a tall tale. It was scary. My heart was racing like it never has since I first tried skydiving. But it was also, exciting. I was scared long after that thing was gone. For the next few days, when the fear wore off, I started to feel regret. I wished I had a camera at that time, and I knew people probably wouldn't believe me when I told them this. I guess it's one of those things you have to see for yourself to really get it. I've been through it, and it was really tough. I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. I wanted to share something I encountered recently. But to start off, I'll let you know that I've made my home in British Columbia's Great Bear Rainforest for the past 5 years. The rainforest is along the Pacific coast of Canada. I came for the wide variety of elusive species that call this ecoregion home. Little did I realize that I was going to stumble upon something pretty unsettling while living here. You know how some people say that you never can know what you might stumble upon when you're tracking wildlife? This place has taught me to stay ready for anything, be it a rare bird or a surprise grizzly. Despite the risks, there's a thrill in letting nature be in charge. But I wasn't ready at all for what happened to me. Apart from bird watching, my work involves setting up wildlife trail cameras at various hotspots in the forest, places that are frequently visited by animals. These trail cameras are crucial, offering a look at the forest's inhabitants in their natural state. It wasn't the usual lynx or wolf sightings that caught my attention. It was the strange and eerie footage that stood out. The forest, with its tall spruce trees and wide rivers, is a haven for wildlife. At dusk, the light filtering through the mossy trees gives the forest a life of its own. Even after years, the sight of the forest at dusk still impresses me. But on this evening, as the sun began to dip, and the shadows from the trees started to stretch long, I had this cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. I felt like I wasn't alone, but it was hard to explain why. I felt the eyes of predators on me in the past, and was usually right that something was lurking around. A heavy silence hung in the air then, muffling the forest sounds. Admittedly, a part of me attributed these strange happenings to my overworked mind. But as the darkness deepened, the uneasiness persisted. It was around this time that I decided to pack it in for the night and review the footage from the day's trail cams. The scenes that unfolded from the clips were mundane at first. A couple of deer grazing, a black bear rummaging around, all the usual sightings. But then, there was this particular clip from a trail cam installed deep into the forest. It was grainy as the limited night vision was doing its best to capture the scene. It was then that I saw a four-legged shape moving unnaturally, almost like a human. My first impression was that it was a person pretending to be an animal, but it was too fast, and the distance it covered was more than any human could handle as easily. I could only make out gaunt, unsettlingly pale skin that was almost luminescent. Then, something unexpected happened. The grainy image flickered and distorted, as if something was scrambling the signal. Right then, the footage went dead for a good 10 seconds. When it came back, a chilling clicking sound filled my small RV. It was a sound I didn't recognize, eerie and out of place, filling the space of my camp. The image of that thing on the camera was deeply unsettling. It was clear that whoever or whatever was on that recording was nothing like the wildlife we're accustomed to in these parts. The figure on the tape was unnaturally tall, yet it wasn't walking on its hind legs as a man would do. It was booking it on all fours, faster than any human ever could. Despite its strangeness, the creature's movement had a deliberate, almost predatory fluidity. In the night vision, the creature's skin was pale and gaunt, giving it an eerie appearance. Suddenly, the clicking sounded again, louder than before. The sudden intensity of the noise snapped me back to reality. It was a series of high-pitched, deliberate noises. I was overwhelmed with fear, but I tried to rationalize what it could be. Was it a deformed animal? Maybe a trick of light coupled with a camera malfunction. But that sound, that eerie clicking noise, none of it was making any sense. That night, I could hardly sleep, the creature's sounds haunting my dreams. The following day, armed with a set of fresh batteries, I decided to retrieve the camera for a closer inspection. As I reached the site, every crunch of leaves underfoot seemed to echo too loudly, and the air felt charged with tension. A shudder ran through me when I discovered the camera lay dislodged with noticeable scratch marks on the casing. No animal I know would or could have done that. Ever since that night, I often get the sense it's still out there. I find myself scanning the forest edge, listening for the clicking sound carried by the wind. Part of me wants to pack up and leave this place forever. Yet there's another part that's curious, intrigued even. There are so many unanswered questions, and I feel like I can't leave until I figure out what that creature was. Since then, I've started to research and talk to others who might have seen something similar. Apparently, among certain cryptid circles, creatures like this are known as crawlers. Not much is documented about them, but this isn't the first time something like this has been captured on a trail cam. I'm on edge, yet there's a part of me that can't ignore the chance to witness something unexplained. So, for the time being, I've decided to stay and keep an eye out for further sightings. This happened in Banff National Park, up here in Canada. For those who haven't been, it's a stunning natural retreat with towering mountains, lush forests, clear rivers, and expansive meadows covered with wildflowers, which were my subject of choice for my watercolor paintings. It was one such sunny day, in the middle of July 2015, and I was in my favorite section, the heart of the park. That day, I embarked on my usual mission, scanning for fields to paint. I'd set my heart on a patch of wild daisies that day. Off to my right, about half a kilometer from the trail, I spotted a field of them in full white bloom. Lost in the beauty, I wandered off the path. So, armed with my paints, canvas, and brushes, I ventured off the path, immersing myself. I was engrossed in it all, carefully determining what angle to paint from. The light was constantly changing, and that was my current challenge. Before I knew it, I had lost track of time and how far I'd wandered. Eventually, I was deeper into the forest than I initially intended. I recall looking up at the sky and realizing it was past mid-afternoon, the sun directly above me. The forest around me was hushed, with streams bubbling softly and leaves rustling in the gentle wind. I began making my way back towards the trail when I noticed something was off. It started as a sixth sense, a sudden unease that gave me pause. I found myself slowly becoming aware of the birdsong diminishing, the forest falling quiet. A strange feeling took over me. Then gradually, an uneasy feeling began to totally replace the calm I'd felt earlier. I felt like I was on a pedestal being studied. I kept walking, but the tension in the air made me feel out of place. About 150 yards from the trail, I then spotted something that wasn't right, striking me as extremely unusual. There on a small mound, hidden in the brush, stood a strange figure. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, my disbelief tinged with curiosity. Then, just at the corner of my vision, in the depths of the shadowy groves, I noticed a figure. A tall, imposing silhouette stood at the forest's edge, stark against the natural setting. As I stared at the figure, I could see it stood on two legs like a person, but its proportions were all wrong. I dropped my supplies, a sense of dread washing over me. The sunlight cutting through the forest shade revealed the creature that logic insisted couldn't exist. Its skin had the texture of reptilian scales, with a sheen that highlighted the movement of muscles underneath. Its limbs, ending in large, dark claws, jutted out awkwardly, looking rather menacing. Then I saw its head. My eyes watered as I observed its head, more dinosaur-like than human. Yellow eyes seemed to peer through the forest at me, unsettling me deeply. I felt a rush of adrenaline, urging me to flee from whatever this creature was. But I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature. I watched. I couldn't move, fixated on the creature as it shifted slightly. It stared back, its two predator eyes assessing the prey, which was me. I felt a fear so primal it resonates to this day, ingrained in my mind. With a struggle, I forced myself to start moving backward. Eye contact was unbroken. I kept it that way, as if it would pounce the moment I looked away. As the distance widened, the creature slowly faded back too, into the dense concentration of trees. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally broke into a run, my heart racing as I hurried back to my house. Despite my rational mind, I couldn't stop shaking. No amount of rationalizing made sense of what I had witnessed. The following morning, when the terror had dampened only marginally, I returned to the quiet meadow. I know, call me crazy, but I wanted to verify all that happened. In broad daylight, the meadow stood as serene as ever, giving away no signs as to what happened the day before. I'd always heard reptilians were just a myth, but the truth had other plans. What confronted me was a harshly undeniable. Returning to the city was not a choice, but a necessity for my sanity. Even after moving away, sleep eluded me, with the image of those yellow eyes recurring in my dreams. Word of my tale spread, and with that came mockery and laughter. I learned to live with it though. But there is one final bit to this story. A few months later, I met a hunter with a similar agonizing account. The hunter, a kind old man, had a look I recognized. It was the same fear on his face that I had felt. As he narrated his encounter with a creature in the woods, my heart pounded. Every hair-raising detail matched my own and solidified my truth. The reptilian monster, it seemed, was not a figment of my wild imagination, but an actual living, breathing creature living in the woods of Banff National Park.